When we think of language learning, it's easy to focus on obvious and familiar elements such as vocabulary, spelling, pronunciation, and grammar. We agree these are important and necessary, but are they sufficient? I'd like to offer a richer model of language which includes these elements, but places them in a wider sense of what it means to comprehend and participate in the kinds of language demanded by different school subjects. We use a spiral to hold all these elements together in an open, generative way. While the centre of the spiral accounts for these smaller elements, its outer regions grow in scale to consider and include larger aspects of language that will shape what's considered appropriate in the centre. Thus, the choices made at the outer parts of the spiral affect what choices should be made in the inner parts. With a richer model of what language entails, we're better prepared to think about what language learning involves. I'll first explain the spiral from inside out, then explain how the language we use is shaped from outside in. Perhaps the smallest unit of interest here is the letter and its relation to a sound, either on its own or in combination with others. English is, however, notorious for its phonetic irregularities. So while knowledge of the English alphabet, regular phonics and understandable pronunciation is important, it's not enough. It's helpful to look at what's called the morpheme. That's the part of the word that carries the building blocks of meaning. You might be familiar with the idea of word building and exercises in adding suffixes and prefixes to build words from these small chunks of meaning. In this way, the word deeper has two morphemes, deep and Both bits contribute to the intended meaning. Sometimes the morpheme adds to meaning, other times it's doing work to make that meaning available for particular spots in the sentence grammar. For example, helpful gives us the meaning of help in an adjective form, and helpfully shifts this to an adverb slot. From morphemes, we can move to the level of word. For many of us, learning a second language meant long lists of vocabulary items to memorise, and the dictionary was our guide to what each word meant. A focus of learning at this level is again necessary, but not sufficient. Words don't always stick to their dictionary meanings. They can take on different meanings depending on how they're used. Words are combined into the larger units of phrases and sentences. It's helpful to pay attention to phrases as useful combinations and to look for conventional strings that frequently occur. For example, common phrases such as in the first place, last but not least, on the other hand. These strings and combinations might include idioms. For example, let's call it a day. And they might include phrasal verbs, for example, to run up, to run in, or to run out. In these cases, the meaning belongs to the phrase, not to each word. Words and phrases create meaningful sentences when combined and ordered according to the conventions of grammar. First language speakers tend to acquire these rules as unconscious expertise. They'll know what sounds right. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way for the second language learner. Grammatical choices also contribute to the meaning made. For example, there's a lot of meaning about time involved in the choice of English verb tense. Sentences are combined into paragraphs and then into written texts or into spoken utterances and interactions. We will call this level texts here to refer to the scale of language knowledge operating above the sentence level. To communicate effectively and appropriately, texts require control of these larger protocols, structures and conventions that work beyond the sentence level grammar. The way we stage and style these particular texts is informed by the level of genre. Genre refers to the type of text and the social expectations around how that kind of text should be organised and worded. Genres are like generic templates for the different kinds of texts used in a society. In this way, we know what to expect if we're reading a recipe, science report, or a news item. Each genre has its typical features and conventional choices in grammar. Knowing about genres helps the language learner build effective texts. Finally, the larger scale we want to add to our spiral model is that of discourse. Our lives and worlds of meaning are organised in contemporary discourses that make certain meanings thinkable and sayable, while others become unthinkable and unsayable. In this way, every society has its taboo or risky topics, and every knowledge discipline has its particular terms and validated forms of argument or evidence. Our use of language is always shaped by what can and can't be said in particular situations. This becomes very important when we think about the school day and the various school subjects that pupils move across. Each discipline has its own discourse, its own set of specialised terms, and its own textual genres. Part of bringing students into the discipline is letting them know about these expectations. So, let's work backwards now. Any language, written or spoken, emerges from a particular discourse which makes some things sayable and others unsayable. Language choices are further shaped by genre expectations about how text should be organised and what's considered appropriate. Within texts, there are mid-level structures, such as paragraphs that organise sentences into larger units of meaning. The sentence level is governed by grammar rules to allow words and phrases to communicate the intended meaning. Within words, there are morphemes that carry meaning. The morphemes are rendered in either letters or sounds. Language is thus a deep resource involving multiple levels to master. The spiral is an open form because language is ultimately a creative resource. The spiral model captures how, to make sense and communicate meanings, our language choices are shaped by social conventions and expectations at many levels. There's always the opportunity to break rules and conventions, but you do so at the risk of losing meaning. With this model, we hope we've expanded your understanding of what language involves and therefore what learning a language would entail. The familiar concerns with spelling, pronunciation and grammar form part of the necessary learning, but in themselves they're not sufficient, especially if we're thinking about the school curriculum and the multiple genres and discourses students need to master.